Hi, I'm Nicole Webb Bodie, partner at Healthcare Plus Solutions Group. I had the pleasure to sit down with Quint Studer, our co-founder, for an insightful look back at the history of what has become the focus for so many organizations in the industry: experience and engagement. Whether you've known Quint, worked with him, read his books, or even heard him speak, you undoubtedly know he has been called one of the best friends to healthcare. If you don't know Quint, you likely know and use many of the tools that he created and implemented at healthcare organizations across the country. Please enjoy this short clip from our conversation. To watch the full video, you can visit our website and our learning library at www.healthcareplussg.com. When you think back of the great work that you did with Studer Group, what are 2 or 3 elements that you think really made it successful?
Well, I think we created sort of an industry. I mean, people started saying, well, gee, what's going to happen when they leave? So that became the birth of chief experience officers. So when we worked with Cleveland Clinic the first years, they didn't have a chief experience officers. They didn't have a department. They said, well, how do we continue this? So I think one of the big impacts is the investment. Investment in people, training, development, investment in seeing that it wasn't a nice to have, and seeing that it's clinical. I never wanted not to be clinical because I felt if it's clinical, it'll stick. If it's not clinical, it might not stick. So we really wanted to show that you can improve the clinical outcomes of the patient by doing some of the tools and techs we have. One, from getting them to show up, to making sure they're following their treatment plan, making sure they're taking their medication right. I think that was really important. And then connecting the whole employee piece to it to show the impact of retention on length of stay, mortality index. Because I think once you connect something to the clinical foundation of why we exist in healthcare, it becomes integrated and part of the fabric of an organization.
And so connecting it clinically, but you also connected it with data. So you had data to show with employee engagement, data to show with patient experience. Let's talk a little bit about where HCAHPS is today. So it's been flat for the past almost 8 years. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's not flat everywhere. I think it depends on where you're at. I think what happened is sometimes we can make something too burdensome, too complex. You know, one of the things that, again, I've had industrial psychologists look at my work, and one of the things they notice is that we take complex things, we make it simple. So, you know, it's not the fanciest overhead. It's not, let's do 12 steps. So research shows that if you hone in and do just a few things really well, you do better. So I think what happens is, as you get more resources, more people, it came a little bit maybe overwhelming. And then you maybe don't factor in the newness. Even before COVID, turnover in healthcare had gone up. People had left for all sorts of different ventures, so you got a lot of inexperience. So when you get a lot of inexperience, you have to narrow what you're asking people to do. Well, at the time, because of the growth of patient experience, human experience, it became there was more things to do. So that's why when somebody writes an article, I immediately go to HCAHPS results and looks at, well, it might be great, it might sound good, it might look like a good overhead, but do they have the metrics that drive it? So I think part of it was a combination of taking something and making it too much to put on an inexperienced workforce. And then during COVID, it even kicked up more. So during COVID, and we look at after COVID, maybe 30 to 50% of managers, particularly in the inpatient unit, have less than 3 or 4 years experience, and 50% of the nurses. So you gotta be real careful. So, you know, you can't ask them to do some of the things they were doing. And then we threw in a lot of technology, which always is meant to be good, but have we maybe turned what was started out as relationships and love turned into business and transactions? And I think without knowing it, it just drifts into transactional relationships instead of personal relationships.
Becomes almost a checklist.
Yeah, a check. And again, checklists are not bad, but they're not great if you're sitting. Checklists are great if you're in the OR.
Right.
If you're in the OR, I like a checklist. But if I'm a manager and I'm just trying to build a relationship, for me to have a checklist or something, it takes away. We don't want a wall between us.
So you talked about post-pandemic, we have a lot of new leaders in the healthcare industry, either first-time leaders or new to organizations. What does that look like for an organization, and what do they do to help improve their patient experience?
I think I understand the measurement. I think we can be much more sophisticated than we are. So for example, we look at race. I'm up in a hospital recently and I found there's Hispanic patients tended to feel better about the hospital than non-Hispanic. Not wrong or right. Why is that? You look at things, when do people enter? Could it matter when they come? I love data. I look at data in the ER. How long does it take for a person to get treated and leave? There's usually a time limit on that. And if you don't hit that time limit, no matter how great you are, once they're in the room, you're not going to change that overall perception of care. If you wait in a restaurant way longer than you should, the meal can be great, but you're still not happy. How quick do they get up to the room? I think we really have learned through rewiring and trust how to diagnose a little bit better. Because if you get the diagnosis right, the treatment doesn't get more complex. It actually gets easier. I think the skill development of leaders is really, though I feel good that we've doing a lot more skill development of leaders, I think we have to be really more individualized. Because I've learned this from precision medicine. I think anyone in healthcare sees the great value of precision medicine, which N equals 1. I think when we look at, we call it precision leadership development, it has to come down to the human being. How do they learn? How much experience do they have? What can they? And the magic word is this doable. Because if it's not doable, it might sound great, but when you run out of a room, if it's not doable, I love sports. And if you look at teams that don't win, they start making their game plan bigger and they lose even more. The greatest leaders are ones that can individualize the approach to the person and make sure they sequence it in a way that the person builds confidence as they go. So I think it's really rewiring the whole way we develop individuals and provide them with skill training.